Welcome on in, everybody. Welcome to your Midnight Book Club. I'm your Cowboy Monk, and I'm very excited about tonight's book club. We're reading a book I've been really stoked to get to. But before we even get to that, we got business to take care of, because guess what? I watched a movie this weekend. So now we got to talk about it.
Monk at the movies.
All right, so let's get into it. What did I see? Well, I saw one of the seminal pieces of cryptid cryptid cinema, and that is the Mothman Prophecies. Now, unfortunately, the Mothman in it is not nearly as cool as the one that looks here, the one that's in the painting here, but it's based on the book by, of course, the great John A. Keel, which we learned about a couple weeks ago when we learned the origins of the Mothman. He's an investigator who went down and really dove into the weird. Unfortunately, the movie's not about him. The movie's about Richard Gere. I mean, we love Richard Gere in our own way. It's about him being a investigative reporter whose wife died from kind of like an encounter with Mothman. Not really. Spoiler alert. Apologies. And from there, he randomly gets sucked in to the Mothman sightings happening in and around Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Now, the movie gives credit to John A. Keel's book of the same name, The Mothman Prophecies, and it kind of smashes together a bunch of different sightings. Overall, I'd have to give it 7 out of 10 cowboy hats. I really enjoy the parts where it talks about interdimensional entities, and I like the theories that they mention about it. What got to me were the more boring scenes. It's very much a victim of the early aughts. Like high budget movies being set in like newspaper rooms, and a lot of scenes with talking when we could have like horrifying Mothman encounters instead. But other than that, I really enjoyed it. There were some really good parts to it. Richard Gere, of course, kicks butt in it, and anything about Mothman is all right with me. And you do get a couple good sightings of the old Mothman. And it has the Silver Bridge. It doesn't take place in the 60s like when it happened, but it does have the same disaster. So there's some cool points to it. I ain't gonna complain. But overall, I'd say 7.5 cowboy hats out of 10 for the Mothman Prophecies movie. Speaking of interdimensional entities and intelligences from other dimensions or artificial intelligence, space, angels, demons, ghosts, anything of the paranormal, Bigfoot, Momo, Orange Eyes, the Chupacabra, Skunk Ape, all that good stuff, all kind of falling under experiences people have with non-human intelligence. That's what the focus of tonight is going to be. We're going to be looking at a brand new book written by a professor who studied religious studies for years, reading all the old esoteric texts, and then was slowly sucked into the world of UFOs, being a skeptic at first, and then becoming a complete believer, which is very typical of the UFO researcher story, right? It was the same thing with old John Mack and all those guys. John Mack, the PhD psychiatrist from Harvard who studied alien abductions, went in not believing, came out being a complete believer, and he wrote this book about it, Abduction, which we started reading together too. So it's kind of like everything when we've been reading has been leading to this book now. Now, the author of the book we're going to jump into, which is Encounters here, DW Pasulka, works with top tier and top level scientists and professors and all sorts of people in the field of space research, technology research, brain research, all this other stuff. Now, a lot of her sources remain anonymous, so they're just there under, pseudonyms. We're going to learn all about that in the introduction. I'm going to shut up about it so we can just dive on in because I'm super excited to get to it. But first, as always, let's get into the virtual wasteland. let's get back to the lecture at hand, and that is the book Encounters. Now, what we're going to dive into tonight is encounters, experiences with non-human intelligences, explorations with UFOs, dreams, angels, AI, and other dimensions. Now, the author of this book, W.D. Pasulka, also has a book called American Cosmic, which is a look at where the UFO idea and belief started and where it's going. In interviews I've seen with the author, that's kind of where she was introduced to a lot of really interesting people who believe in UFOs and have information about the programs that have even been going on in the government with retrieved craft that we have, sightings that pilots have made, and all that good stuff. So she dives into the world and learns all this stuff. This book is a summation of people's encounters with those intelligences. So we're just going to dive into the introduction. And of course, as we're reading, if this knocks loose any stories of encounters that you've had with the paranormal of the unknown, a UFO, a Bigfoot, a Sasquatch, a Yeti, a skunk ape, a Momo, whatever it may be, a chupacabra, an angel, a demon, whatever it is, I'd love to know, because as always,
we're ready to believe you.
So please let us know, and you'll be right along with some very top level people. That's why I'm excited for this book. Typically on the Midnight Book Club, we read stuff that's a little more obscure and from the 60s. John A. Keel, we love him, but he was a wild man from the 60s, and a lot of his theories are hard to get behind because it happened so long ago. This book was published this 2023, so last year. Very recent, hot off the presses, about encounters with aliens, AI, demons, angels, ghosts, whatever it may be. We're going to get into it. So, without further ado, Encounters. And before we go, we'll just meet the author a little bit. I'm going to read to us about the author. Here's the book we're diving into by DW Pasulka. And here is old DW herself. She is a researcher and professor of religious studies, so knows a lot about the weird and esoteric, especially in Western tradition, like Catholic, Christian, and all that good stuff. So I'm just going to read about the author in the little blurb that they have on the side of the book. So D.W. Pasulka is a professor of religious studies at the University of North Carolina in Wilmington. She has written several books, including American Cosmic, Heaven Can Wait, and Dr. Pasulka's research spans Catholic history to modern-day reports on UAPs and UFOs. So that is Encounters, or the author of Encounters. Here's the book we're diving into now. The path to writing about UFOs was unexpected, but nonetheless a natural progression of my research. As a professor of the history of religion, I study reports of miraculous events and afterlife worlds in Christian history. This includes sightings of aerial beings of light, miraculous flying houses, monks and nuns who levitate and bilocate, and a religious doctrine called purgatory. I relate this because my work reveals how people's beliefs often emerge from their interactions with places and their exposure to media. Scholars in my field generally do not weigh in on truth or falsity of religious claims to truth. Instead, we study the social effects of religious belief and practice. When I finished my work on the Catholic tradition, the shift to study of UFO cultures seemed straightforward. Belief in UFOs, I wrote, is a rapidly growing spirituality that corresponds with the 21st century shift to digital infrastructures. It is similar to religion because people see things in the sky, aerial objects, and they have had no physical evidence that they exist, yet they often attribute them to spiritual significance. UFOs are, as Carl Jung famously wrote, technological angels. They are symbols and signs of a new epoch in human history. The story of UFOs, however, turned out to be more complicated than I thought. In short order, I found myself among scientists in aeronautics and space travel experiencers, people who believe they are in contact with extraterrestrials, as well as various agents of intelligence communities and countless journalists and media personalities. I developed friendships with many of them. The scientists with whom I worked were at the top of their fields, experts in biomedical technologies. They believed that they had evidence that UFOs were real. I began to understand that the UFO event was a spiritual reality for many people, including these scientists. And even though I didn't know it at the time, the topic of my research was about to get very real. So that's what I'm talking about. Finally, we've arrived at a book where the sources we're going to be learning from about UFOs and all this fun interdimensional entities and all this fun stuff we love to talk about, top level scientists. Let's go, DW. Through my study, I found several things to be the case, which I detailed in my published research. First, the public perception of UFOs is mediated and often managed by media and agents of disinformation. Second, the claims of some of the people in my study that they studied UFOs and that the study of UFOs has been going on since the 1940s turned out to be true. Boom, makes me think of Bob Lazar. Boom, makes me think of anyone else who's come forward and been like, yo, in the 40s, I worked on one of the crash sites, or in the 40s, I saw a body. We've encountered a lot of folks like this when we read through the Children of Roswell. Most of those folks in the town of Roswell dealt with one of the bodies or an actual craft if they worked on the base. So this all tracks, which is very cool. I didn't believe or disbelieve the claims made by the scientists in my study. Instead, I documented the development of what I believed is a new form of religion or religious expression. I was as surprised as were many people when the United States military and the Pentagon in the summer of 2021 released an unclassified field report that acknowledged that they had funded secret programs to the study of UFOs. Finally, this development pushed me to think beyond my training and resources available in my field. In effect, the Pentagon report, titled Preliminary Assessment Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, and that's where the horrid UAP comes from. I like calling them UFOs, sorry. Ratified this new form of religion and spirituality. We are currently at a fork in the road with respect to how UFOs are interpreted. The history of religion suggests that with respect to new religious expressions, the creation of a state-sponsored religious institutions often trump people's lived experiences, usually through suppression and silence. Since the UFO is often interpreted in spiritual and religious ways, we can expect to see the same process at play. The early Christian Gnostics saw their books banned and declared heretical by the newly institutionalized Christian church in Rome. And remember, during Halloween, if you were hanging out with me, we read from the Encyclopedia of Witchcraft and Demonology. And in that book, we learn the history of the Christian Gnostics. They are actually kind of one of the sparks for the Inquisition. The Gnostics were several different sects of Christianity that believed in a more like radical and a way different form of practicing Christianity and all that stuff. So they were, of course, all their books were banned, and a lot of them, burnt at the stake or tortured in deep, dark dungeons. All the fun stuff that happened during the witch trials. So it's cool that it ties into here too, The question I posed to myself before writing this book was, what and whose stories about UFOs are being silenced today? I didn't pose this question for a wholly altruistic reasons. The question would help me define the streams that are most revolutionary about this nascent religiosity. And it is so interesting and true, like, just speaking on my own dumbass personal journey. When that Pentagon report was released and the UAP videos were released by the fighter pilots, like, whoa, look at it, the tic tac, I was in such a different place as far as spirituality, where my mind was, and all that stuff. And that kind of cracked the door open to lead me back to a place where my mind's so open to this stuff, I'm like believing things that a few years ago would have been like, holy crap, dude. So it's really interesting how just one crack in the, fabric of reality that shows us that maybe there really is something beyond what we understand just leads to a whole new level of not understanding, because I don't understand jack shit yet, but a whole new level of just being aware, being slightly aware of things, or having my mind open to things that was completely closed off to before. So it's definitely, I understand what she's talking about when she talks about UFOs and the paranormal having kind of a nascent religiosity or to it. Like, if I'm understanding that correctly, I think she means like they create such like a powerful spirituality. It feels much like religion, like believing or like having a faith in this stuff. Interesting, but I feel that. So let's dive into the witnesses we're going to be talking to. Among the people who study UFOs, one stood out to me as possessing an effective method of research, and he was far removed from the field of religious studies. Dr. Jacques Vallée has a PhD in information science from Northwestern University. He's trained in astrophysics and has worked extensively in the field of technology for the United States Department of Defense. Now this, my friends, this guy is an OG UFO dude. So let's put some respect on old Jacques Vallée's name here. I'm going to show you a picture. Here's this cutie right here. If you have seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the Spielberg joint with the boom 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 boom, he was one of the main consultants. I believe he has a role. He has a part in it too. I don't know. I forget. But he was one of the main consultants in it, kind of giving giving Spielberg tips on what the aliens are like and how to communicate with them. Why I love DW Pasulka already is because she is basing her form of research on this bad boy right here, this cutie, Dr. Jacques Vallée, one of the top dog UFO scientists, works for the U.S. Department of Defense, knows a lot of secrets. If you've ever seen the Close Encounters of the Third Kind, this was the guy who gave all the UFO secrets to Spielberg to help him make that movie. So this is where we're basing a lot of our research on this cutie right here. Yeah, look at this guy, right? Look at that smile. You just want to be like, tell me all about UFOs, Jock. So, Vallée is a close associate of another one of the badasses who we love on this channel, and that is Dr. J. Allen Hynek. I didn't get a picture queued up for him, unfortunately. Forgive me, Dr. Hynek. But we know Dr. J. Allen Hynek was the granddaddy, big papa scientist the government hired for the original Project Blue Book. They got Dr. Hynek in there and they're like, yo, take a look at all these crazy reports, prove them wrong. Dr. Hynek looked at him and he's like, there's actually something to this UFO thing. And we need to study it a lot more. The Navy was like, well, we don't like that. So they went to a university and had the people at the university look at all the sightings and just come up with any explanation they could to prove fake stuff. That's where we get the explanations of like swamp gas and all that stuff. So J. Allen Hynek, one of the granddaddies. So Vallée was a close associate and colleague of Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who was a longtime consultant for the United States Air Force on topics related to UFOs and a key figure in most of the secret programs involved in UFO research. Vallée maintains a career as a well-known and successful venture capitalist and calls his work in the field of UFOs a hobby. His focus on witness testimonies and his recognition of potential disinformation is invaluable in the assessment of UFO cases for their social repercussions. And that's one thing too, disinformation. There's an amazing documentary called Mirage Men that goes into how big the disinformation campaign is in the UFO world. Like the government and branches of the military have agents they hire to go to UFO conventions and spill all these beans. It's like a whole bunch of lies, and there's some nuggets of truth within the lies. So then when UFO folks go and just tell that to everybody, it's like, oh, you have to we don't know what's truth and what's just a lie about what they've been studying, what kind of UFO craft they have, or whatever it may be, whatever the heck they're talking about. It's just filled with disinformation. So it's a really important thing to look at, and I love that the book's like, we're already getting into it here in the intro. So I'm gonna rally this excitement. We're gonna keep reading. I found that academics generally will not approach the topic of secrecy and disinformation related to UFOs. This is understandable, as UFO disinformation is a murky topic that is difficult to understand. Yet secrecy and disinformation have been an intrinsic feature of the history of UFOs in the United States, so it is unavoidable. Responsible research into this topic must address disinformation. To avoid it is to avoid the totality of the topic. Jacques not only practices sound research, but he also incorporates knowledge of how disinformation works, and this is a necessary tool in the toolkit of the researcher who endeavors to study UFOs. Jacques wrote that the best way to study the phenomenon is to do field research, that is, to talk to witnesses and to visit the sites where UFOs are seen. It may seem simple, but this method has not dominated official or academic studies. Yeah, I feel like that's true. Most of the books we read are just collections of stories. It's not the person going to the field to talk to the people who are still around. The best book we've read so far, The Children of Roswell, was that, though. The dude going to Roswell to talk to people who experienced it. It's so true. We got to talk to the witnesses and believe them. But here's a quote from old Jacques. The only way we're going to understand it is to stop talking to each other and go back and talk to the witness. So I put the highest priority on the first-hand cases that had not been reported to the press or the UFO community. Because the moment the cases become part of ongoing discussion, they get polarized. The witnesses are bombarded with all kinds of questions, and there are biases. The ego gets into it. I wanted to do a quiet kind of long-term research. What do witnesses have to say? Generally, not what most people assume. In interviews and talks that came after the publication of my research, it became clear to me that non-witnesses have a view of contact that is informed by the entertainment, media, books, television, and popular culture. Their version of contact envisions a scenario which non-human extraterrestrial intelligence contact humans through beings that look human-like and drive spaceships that resemble flying sports cars. In interviews, I fielded questions and comments such as, why don't aliens land on the White House lawn? Or, I can't wait until ET asks to meet our leaders. In comparison with witness reports, the prevailing idea of contact held by most people is unlike that which I heard from witnesses. Jacques also wrote about the narrow ways in which UFO events are interpreted and framed by media. Arthur Whiteley Stryber's book, Communion, we're going to get into this book too. This is the book Communion. We have it. Whoop, whoop. I love that so many of the homies are already being mentioned in the intro. So this is Communion by Whitey Stryber. When this came out, this became a New York Times best freaking seller. This is about Whitey Stryber's encounters over years with the gray aliens. They kept abducting him, telling him, predicting future events, showing him the classic breeding program or hybrid program that's apparently going on, and just overall hanging out with the guy. So very interesting book, very scary encounters. Highly recommend it if you want to, stay up late at night reading a book. He was already a writer before he got abducted, so the aliens picked the right guy to abduct because he's really able to describe what happened to him. But highly recommend it. But this is the book that DW is talking about right now. Communion, a true story by Whiteley Stryber. So everyone sees this alien face and they're like, this is what aliens need to look like. And you know what? If we see an alien or hear about an alien story and the alien doesn't look like this, I'm not gonna believe it. So that's what happens with, all the alien media we consume, I guess. That's what old DW is saying. I bite. So, Whitey Stryber's book Communion came out in the 1980s. It is a harrowing tale of his own experience with beings he calls the Visitors. The cover of the book features the image of what has come to be the iconic look of an alien being, with large almond-shaped eyes and greenish reptilian skin. The image pervaded culture to the extent that Jacques noticed that if witness stories did not conform to the look of Stryber's alien researchers, let me go back there. The image pervaded culture to the extent that Jacques Dr. Vallée noticed that if a witness story did not conform to the look of Stryber's alien, researchers discounted their reports. Media shapes how people view contact and determine how they envision UFO contact scenarios. Researchers tend to focus on UFO events either as the appearance of advanced technologies or they focus entirely on the subjective experience of the person who encounters the alleged spacecraft or extraterrestrials. Yet many witness reports show that these positions are not mutually exclusive. When people see what appear to be unexplained aerial objects, they also experience realities that are not compatible with their ordinary reality. Additionally, there are aftershocks to these effects. People report episodes of knowing the future, of precognition, or and other non-ordinary effects. Rather than treat these experiences as non-rational and paranormal, in the sense of being strange, these events and effects can be understood by a shift of perspective, for which there are precedents in religious traditions and within the lore of indigenous cultures. In the lore of indigenous cultures, that's to me, one of the important things to remember about this. That makes this shit ancient. People, oh yes, Taggy, believe, yes. That makes this shit ancient, and that's why it is important with indigenous beliefs, like of all the world, like all old cultures have these stories of paranormal beings, of others, of whatever it is. That's one thing I did like about the Mothman Prophecies movie. It mentioned that, you know, strange beings like this have been on cave paintings, you know. So we've definitely been in contact with them, and it's going to get interesting here to pay attention to. Some cultures have been in contact with the others or with aliens since the beginning of time, and they're still in contact, and they have ways of contacting and talking through the consciousness with these entities. So when we talk about the discovery of this is just for the West. This is just for the colonizers finally, you know, discovering these things again. Because, you know, we used to, like, but yeah, it's just interesting. It's a whole other book, a whole other topic. When Harvard researcher Dr. John Mack, another friend of the freaking channel, Dr. Mack, look at this sexy guy. So this is Dr. John Mack, MD. We got his book too, Abduction. Remember, we read a bit of his book. We read about old Ed's abduction experience. He was a Harvard psychiatrist, 40 years in the game of psychiatry before he got interested in UFOs. He dives in, starts studying abduction stories, studies over 100 people. It researches these people in depth, you know, does the whole psychiatry tests, all that stuff. Determines none of these people are crazy. They're all rational truth tellers, and he believes them. He goes from a skeptic to a believer. And here is his book again, Abduction, Dr. John E. Mack. Harvard-trained psychiatrist, became a believer. When Harvard researcher Dr. John Mack published his classic book, Abduction, Human Encounters with Aliens, in the 1990s, his research focused on the initial shock that normal people have when they experience what they interpret as being in contact with either extraterrestrial or non-human intelligences. His research moved on from his initial shock, however, and he came to realize that most of the human societies have recognized that people have had these experiences. He learned that knowledge systems of many indigenous cultures possess frameworks for understanding contact. They do not pathologize these events or experiences. Lakota are among the many indigenous cultures that report contact with members of star nations, or what others would call extraterrestrials. The realities of this contact are unfolded into a worldview in which the distinction between natural and supernatural, so basic to European thought, was meaningless. In 2018, an illuminating exchange occurred that shed light on the difference between the prevailing and dominant idea of UFOs and that of the lore contained within some of the indigenous cultures. It was a conversation between scholars of indigenous studies and the Breakthrough Listening Initiative of SETI. And this is SETI. Whenever you see these old satellites in pictures or in shows and you see a move, this is SETI. This is where we send out radio waves to space and we try and listen to see if we have any radio contact back. So SETI reached out to people, indigenous researchers of their own indigenous societies. It was a conversation between scholars of indigenous studies and breakthrough listening initiative of SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. SETI reached out to the group and asked them to produce a statement to answer the question, what would you want SETI scientists to know about potentially making contact? The scholars were impressed that SETI had reached out to them, and they diligently set to work. Soon, however, in conversations with scientists at SETI, they reported that SETI had instructed them to keep their statement to 2 pages, to avoid all commentary about whether contact has already begun. The scholars of indigenous studies, who are from indigenous communities, would not misrepresent their cultural knowledge. So they spoke up and explained that for them, contact has been an ongoing reality. The Breakthrough Listen initiative, through their actions, seem to discount that contact is an ongoing reality for many people from indigenous cultures around the world. Contact with non-human intelligence has also been an ongoing reality, attested to within almost every traditional religion. Yet SETI does not acknowledge the information gained within these traditions. Why? Why, SETI? Why? You cold scientists with your instruments. Just as in the case of people who asked me why ET hadn't landed on the White House lawn, ironically, and we talked about this before, UFOs did buzz the skies over the White House in 1952 for 2 nights in a row. Fighter planes even went after them. It appears that SETI and many people have had a specific idea of contact that is informed by media. If data emerges that contradicts this belief or idea, they dismiss it. This is called confirmation bias, and it plays a huge role in the public perception of UFO events. Some aspects of confirmation bias seem to be based on fear. I call this fear because many conversations I've had with the government officials and journalists reveal that they believe that contact with non-human intelligence would eradicate the religious beliefs of millions of people and thus create social mayhem. It won't. Traditional religions, including Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, as well as Buddhism and Hinduism, in addition to indigenous communities, include some recognition in parts of their histories and traditions, either acknowledging or pondering the existence of extraterrestrials or non-human intelligence, or do not discount it. We all already believe, baby. It's deep within us to believe in this. It's ancient. The fear was made clear in an exchange I had with a scholar who studies how scenarios of UFO contact might affect members of religious traditions. He thought that this would eradicate people's belief in God and in an afterlife. My position is that it wouldn't impact religious belief, as religions already have a place in metaphysical categories for non-human intelligences, or of many types of God, jinn, angels, beings from other planets, etc. He answered my suggestion with a scenario. He suggested that contact with extraterrestrials would be a problem for monotheistic religions if aliens thousands of years ahead of humans landed on Earth and explained that there was no God. He said that humans would be inclined to believe the aliens because they possess technology more advanced than human technology. As I read this scenario, it occurred to me that this looks like how colonists might view themselves if they engaged in self-reflection. Dude, exactly. Right? Yeah, that's true. Betty was chill with it. Old Betty and Barney. As I read this scenario, so that is interesting too. I love, I mean, it's such a good point. Like, this is it's a very human view on aliens, right? To think that they would, I don't know, it's just interesting. So we'll start from the top there again. As I read this scenario, it occurred to me that this looks like how colonists might view themselves if they engaged in self-reflection. What are we afraid of from contact? If we happen to be an empire, it appears that we are afraid of meeting beings much like ourselves. Yep. The fear of this particular context scenario happens to be a narrative of colonization, imbued with violence and subjugation, because that's all we know. That's what we do when we met other cultures. We violently subjugated them. That's human history, right? It could possibly be true, but it's one of the many interpretations of contact, just one of many. This military empire scenario is just one view of many about UFO contact. Identified sky objects are as old as human societies that have as old as the human societies that have identified them. As I delved into the indigenous written and mostly oral cultural knowledge about extraterrestrials and non-human intelligence, I found a direct connection between these ideas and the experiences and beliefs of the scientists. I knew who worked within the programs and studied this phenomena. Ironically, scientists who studied what they believed are UFOs do not have a military scenario of UFO contact. This is what's important, folks. For those who might fear contact, the scientists that actually study these scenarios and are possibly in contact with other non-human intelligences, they do not really follow that it's going to be scary or bad. That contact will be like how we would initiate contact, which is violently, and that's very cool. It makes you feel good inside. And like indigenous scholars who spoke with SETI believe that we are already in contact. They do not posit contact as a future possibility, but as a lived reality. Contact as a lived reality. That's what I feel like we have to, like, that's the shift. They're not going to land anywhere and be like, we're here. They're already here. They're already talking to folks. In my previous research, I used pseudonyms to protect the professional reputations of the scientists with whom I have worked. Since then, one scientist, Dr. Gary Nolan, so this is one scientist we'll actually get to hear their real name, and that's this dude right here, Dr. Gary Nolan. He, in American Cosmic, DW's first book, he used a pseudonym. So now he's out here in the open. He's like, I believe they're here. Let's roll. So let's learn about old Dr. Nolan. In my previous research, I used pseudonyms to protect the professional reputations of the scientists with whom I had worked. Since then, one of the scientists, Dr. Gary Nolan, dropped his pseudonym and went public. The other is still known through the pseudonym Tyler D. And we're going to get to know the infamous Tyler D very well through this book. We're going to hear that name a lot. Each shares the belief that contact has happened and is ongoing. Why assume, like members of SETI and other institutions, that contact is only a future possibility? Perhaps, as Suzanne Kite writes, because it serves a particular agenda. The colonial sense of progress is incredibly fixed to an unrelenting linear timeline towards a settler future, where indigenous peoples are an uncivilized past, American white superiority the present, and Mars colonization and extraterrestrials the future. So it's like it's hammering it into a timeline that fits the government's needs a little more than the people's. Well, that's just how it goes in history, right? Oh, when the coffee's cold, you just gotta go for it, man. Hold on one second. I need to have a quick cough here. And we're back. This is one fork in the road regarding UFO belief, and it is a direction that we don't have to take. Assumptions of the most innovative of the scientists who study UFOs confers with the knowledge gleaned from indigenous communities, centuries of contact. The other fork in the road appears to be the point in the direction of a comparison between patterns shared by these communities. It's time to take Dr. Jacques Vallée's advice and turn back to the witness. Listening to places terrestrial, virtual, and cosmic. And that's another freaking awesome thing about this book. We're going to meet the scientist who invented the current version of AI. In this book, she goes by the pseudonym Moon Girl. That's much later on. You're going to have to keep tuning in every Saturday to listen to that. Or catch the videos on YouTube. They'll be up within the week that we have them. Or watch the live on YouTube. But I do a cut up version that will be, it's more concise, takes out some of the pauses and stuff like that. But make sure you check that out. So that's another exciting thing, because that's what it talks about. Consciousnesses we're creating inside virtual worlds, AI consciousness. That's real consciousness. That's like giving voice to silicone, giving voice to the chips. So I'm very excited to work my way through this book. In my previous work, two places instigated a transformation in my understanding of UFO religiosity. The first was New Mexico, New Mexico, and specifically San Agustin, where I visited the location of the alleged UFO crash debris site that was reported to be among the flap of sightings and crashes that occurred in 1947. This was obviously a highly mythic and mythologized place, inextricably bound to the atomic bomb and military secrecy, as well as being ground zero location for UFO belief. I ended that research at the Vatican, awesome, and the Spicola Vatican, the Vatican Observatory, two other highly mythologized places and sites of the apex of Western religious and colonial culture. Amen. And the Vatican's got their secret archive and all that stuff, which if you're a researcher, you're allowed into. I could not have orchestrated, even if I had tried, a more fitting arrangement of iconic geography in which to experience and write about the new global cosmicism. The belief in the cosmic evolution of the human species. Place and its relationship to beliefs and practices more than ever revealed itself as a primary site of revelation. Places are not only specific places around the globe, but the planet we live on, Earth, figure prominently in the ensuing chapters. Human beings are venturing into spaces they have never traveled. These spaces are virtual and cosmic. That human beings are visiting both places at the same time is historic and monumentous. Yeah, the pseudonyms are great, right? New places, I just saw that tag. New places bring new ways of thinking and being, and we are only on the cusp of learning what these are and will become. In referencing new forms of consciousness arising from these spaces, I am not referring to the New Age idea like a coming of an age of Aquarius. Instead, these observations come from work with scholars who identify novel brain states and consciousnesses that are associated with space and virtual environment. For example, Dr. Aya Whiteley, and this is who we're going to hang out with mostly tonight. Dr. Aya Whiteley is a pioneer in space psychology and the new psychology of the cosmos. So this is who we're learning about tonight. This is who we're going to be spending time with, just so you have a picture in your mind's eye here. This is Dr. Aya. Dr. Aya Whiteley is a space psychologist and cognitive engineer who advised the UK Space Agency as a chair of the Space Environment Working Group. She finds that in space, astronauts, and this is really interesting, astronauts develop their own rules and culture, which is often at odds and significantly deviates from the common rules assumed by people in mission control. The further you get from Earth, the further the restrictions of your Earth brain are upon you. You start making your own astronaut society and your own bad boy and bad girl astronaut rules, baby. Her work identifies the very beginnings of a shift in global consciousness with respect to space. Her research contributed to a shift in the culture of aviation. Her research helped eliminate the stigma associated with pilot reports of anomalous phenomena. And this is important. This is why I really wanted to jump into the intro with you guys, because it is really cool to learn about and try to understand the culture of the stigma around reporting anomalous events in aviation and in the military, and how it was such a culture of just do not say freaking anything because you will get ridiculed. You will get put in the having to go talk to somebody, whatever it may be. It's highly stigmatized. So we're going to jump into the history of why that is and how this psychologist is revolutionizing that, so people are being more open to talk about things, and how much of a huge step forward it is for the government to be opening up and being like, yo, there is stuff out there to help encourage people to come forward and talk about their experiences. But let's go. Her research helped eliminate the stigma associated with pilot reports of anomalous phenomena. Her current hobby focuses on helping pilots safely process anomalous phenomenon. Her work with pilots and astronauts, as well as her knowledge in indigenous practices of health and well being, inspired her to create a program developing a means of communication with intelligent non human life that already surrounds us. She also creates technologies that she hopes will transcribe animal languages. Fucking cool. She is among the growing number of scientists who utilize technology to decipher the languages of animals. In chapters 1 and 2 feature her work and projects. The people featured in the following chapters are experiencers, that is, they report that they have experiences with non-human intelligence. The question is, can this experience be called contact with extraterrestrial intelligence? This question is something that has not been answered in any conclusive way. Even the scientists I know who are most embedded within the current programs of UFO research do not answer this question. And that's why, to me, these are my favorite types of scientists to read their, research. Who admit there are no answers to many of these questions. We're just so scratching the surface. They don't even try to answer those questions because it's cool, man. It feels right because they don't know. They are involved in space research and the efforts to understand aerial objects within our atmosphere. And they believe that this intelligence is non-human and related to aerial vehicles that do not appear to be from Earth. But they also report other things, such as vivid dreams, non-linear experiences of time, and knowing things that will happen, precognition. Often, they will not officially report these aspects of their experiences because they do not fit the common perception of an extraterrestrial encounter. But you gotta include all those things, and that's why we love the great John Keel, who reported on the Mothman and the Mothman prophecies, because he included all things. John Keel is one of the only cryptid researchers that when he went to an area, he was like, tell me about the poltergeist reports that are happening. Tell me about the UFO reports that are happening along with this cryptid sighting, because they're all connected, just like this book's doing now, Encounters here. It's all connected. It all, it's part of the same deal. Yo, tag! Goot, goot, goot. Yep, exactly. No more of that, right? Tag, that's what's so cool about Dr. Whitley here. She's eliminating that. No more being like, you know what, fighter pilot, you saw the planet Venus or you saw a big fart of swamp gas. It's like, no, you saw something. But very true. And thank you for the biddies, my friend. A tip of the Bobby Hill hat to you. So anywho, also awesome that this psychologist is developing a means to talk to animals. Pretty soon we'll be living just like how in Baldur's Gate and in I think you could do this in Baldur's Gate, but also in I haven't played that Larian game yet, but in the one I have played, Divinity Original Sin 2, you got a power, you talk to animals. So pretty soon we'll be able to do that. That's happening, folks. So the scientists that are studying UFOs at the top levels, they're having these experiences, vivid dreams, encounters with entities, precognition, non-linear in events of time. Wild stuff. So these scientists don't report these things. Oh, I mean, yeah, a magpie would be awesome. I mean, the moment you say that, Tag, I talk to my cats, Mew and Mewtwo. I talk to my cats, and then I'd talk to my dogs, and then I'd go outside and I'd talk to the crows. In that order, because we've had when we first moved up here, there weren't that many crows where we live, but we live in a nice little like secluded valley kind of in the mountain, and now there's like a fat family of crows, and they dominate. They fly around. It's so fun to like walk by them. They're not too scared of us anymore. They used to fly when we walk by. Now they know we're not fucking with them, so they'll let us get a little closer. But it's super cool. So I think I'd go in that order. But yeah, that's a great question. That's the order I'd go into. Magpie's a great answer too. That's one. Also, learning about the intelligence of crows. That's one of the first things that really, like back in the day, opened my mind to animal intelligence and the differences of consciousness, the nature-focused consciousness versus our aware consciousness. Oh, it's just interesting. But hell yeah. But it's wild. These scientists having these same experiences. So they don't report these things to their higher ups because, yes, dude. What up? What up, Unbroken? Love you too, dude. We're reading from a book tonight about a current researcher doing talking to aliens and interdimensional entities, scientists talking to them right now, and that's what we're reading from. We're in the introduction. But love you, man. Thanks for thank you. Look at that 18-month streak. Okay, so because of the culture of being ridiculed and you come out and you say these things, you're looked at as crazy. Dr. Mack, remember when we read from his book, that's exactly what happened to him. The whole psychiatry industry kind of turned their back on him. And because of that, scientists are afraid to come forward with this stuff. But they do tell old DW and they do tell Dr. Whitley, because as a psychiatrist, there's that doctor-patient confidentiality, right? You're not going to get told on or anything like that. So these scientists report them to me, however, and that's the author, DW, and to Dr. Whitley. Researchers need to discard the media idea of extraterrestrial contact so that they can begin to understand the nature of contact with perceived non-human intelligence, whatever it is called. Whatever the name it is given, it is a reality for many people and has been for many thousands of years. After exploring Dr. Whitley's work, Chapter 3 and 4 relate the experiences of a scientist who works for a major research agency. He is... Sorry. She uses a big fancy word for pseudonym here. Anywho. After hanging out with Dr. Whitley in chapters 1 and 2, in chapters 3 and 4, we're going to hang out with a scientist who works for a major research agency. He uses a pseudonym in the book because he hasn't gone public with what he knows yet. Due to the nature of his work, his experiences highlight religious and supernatural aspects of contact that are rarely addressed, which are the religious and spiritual experiences and interpretations that they often inspire. An important part of the study of UFO events are the spiritual and religious frameworks of the experiencers. By following the data, even if it is considered strange, we can approach cases with open-minded inquiry and include information that doesn't conform to previous assumptions. With the exceptional rate of AI, we will be able to map and understand this data in ways that will help progress knowledge of these curious experiences. Let me get through that. Butchered that one. We will be able to map and understand this data in ways that will help progress knowledge of these curious experiences. Then we're going to get into chapters 5 and 6 and explore the experiences of Jose, a young soldier from the U.S. Marines who understands UFOs within the context of his tumultuous upbringing in Texas and New Mexico. For him, UFO contact events are folded within a worldview permeated by spiritual forces, including angels and demons. Jose's experiences also highlight a theme that emerges in many reports: the experience of an invisible network that is not the internet. And when I hear invisible network that is not the internet, that makes me think of Swamp Thing, baby. Swamp Thing, and when he talks about going into the green is the consciousness of all plants and animals, I believe too. Or maybe that's the red in the DC comic universe. I'm not 100% sure. But that's the green, right? It's the consciousness. It's the nature's internet. Jose compares this organic network to the noosphere of Jesuit philosopher Pierre Teilhard de Chardin's writings. So this Jesuit wrote about this stuff hundreds of years ago, which he refers to as an Earth atmosphere of information. This concept shows up in Dr. Wheatley's work, as well as within indigenous knowledge systems that link it with being in sync with land and place. And this reminds me of stuff we've read about as well, people talking about going into the universal consciousness to obtain information. Same idea here. If they're all connecting. Then in chapter 7, It extends what is known about contact with non-human intelligence into new frontiers. Simone is a venture capitalist who specializes in humane uses of AI and has worked on projects with DARPA, the Defense of Advanced Research Projects Agency, which is a research and development agency in the United States Department of Defense responsible for the development of emerging technologies for the use by the military. She proposes the bold hypothesis that aliens or extraterrestrials are now here on Earth and that they are from outside space and time. I mean, that I believe that for sure. Yes, they are not extraterrestrial beings from another galaxy, but non-human intelligence from outside our dimension of space-time made explicit through AI. Oh, dude, fuck yes, that sounds so interesting. She supports this hypothesis with research and science. Additionally, in her work, the organic network appears again as an inextricable aspect of contact. Simone also relates her experiences of contact within the framework of the download, which was explored as something related to the scientists with whom I worked. This is a process through which extremely creative people appear to receive, through spontaneous cognition, calculations, information about biomedical products, or similar types of information without any apparent effort. Boom. This is the same thing that Tesla talked about, right? He talked about being able to download shit from a consciousness. And other philosophers and scientists have talked about this too, that we've read about. I've mentioned that among the people who showed up within my research sphere as soon as I focused on the topics of UFOs included some members of the intelligence communities. Government programs from the 1950s onward attempted to manage the public perception of UFOs, and now the United States government has admitted that it has been studying the topic. It makes sense that intelligence agents whose job it is to collect information would be interested in this research. Chapter 8 explores my relationships with some of the people I have met who are part of these communities by choice, and some who are not. My colleague and friend Patricia Trucy grew up with a father who worked for what she refers to as the secret space program. Now, I'm really excited for Chapter 8 to get into the secret space program. I've always heard rumor of that, and it's like, yes, finally we're diving in. This chapter is part interview and part reflection upon the lesser-known realities of UFO cultures. The final chapters relate to the remarkable UFO experiences from the former atheist Lynn Flippou. His encounter with a UFO as a teenager began a shift in his worldview that spanned a course of many years. His experiences reveal common themes among the experiences described within the pages of this book. Dreams that are so vivid that the experiencers redefine them as visions. Encounters with not only UFOs, but other types of non-human intelligence, and strings of synchronicities or meaningful coincidences. I've ended the book with Lynn's experience because they provide the clearest example of the UFO event I've encountered among thousands of accounts. So that's going to be really good. And if, that's going to be a UFO event that's just par none. I wonder if it's better than the Andreessen affair, which was another great fun one to read. It involves not just the event itself, but the context of the event and the ensuing effects on Lynn. Lynn started out as a committed atheist. Oh, I remember those days. Oh, in my 20s. I was a committed atheist for a long time. Yet his experiences were so meaningful and even unlikely that he came to an understanding that there is a higher power and a belief that life is intrinsically spiritual and meaningful. Lynn was not compelled by parents or society to come to this conclusion. Amen. And he didn't reach it on his own. He felt that he had a direction. The direction was not from an individual, but was revealed through meaningful events and unlikely occurrences that he felt revealed an inherent meaning to his life that he characterizes as magical and sacred. And to me, I think that's something for all of us, right? If we could learn to consider all of our lives, no matter what we're going through, magical and sacred, I think then you're cruising, right? You're feeling good at that point. Or I don't know, maybe. A reorientation. When I decided to study UFOs and the people who believed in them, I saw the UFO through stereotypes. I thought of them as flying saucers from planets and solar systems far, far away. Like most people, I inherited this view from movies, television, and video games. I didn't expect to meet scientists who believed like monks and mystics and believed... Sorry, let me back up there. I didn't expect to meet scientists who lived like monks and mystics and believed that UFOs were interdimensional intelligences or emergent consciousness. Like, that's so interesting. That, to me, it's got to be both. There's got to be both extraterrestrial intelligence or interdimensional intelligence, and then the emerging intelligences of AI and all that good stuff. But who knows? I mean, I don't know anything. It just could be. I just love the idea of both of them. I also didn't expect to hear reports of altered realities, uncanny coincidences, angels and demons, and the existence of a network like that described by Jesuit priest and scholar Teilhard de Chardin. According to these reports, this network predates the internet and is accessible to some people. All these elements repeated over and over convince me that the UFO constitutes an ongoing event for many people, of which the sighting is just one aspect. In addition to the sighting are many other elements. This book details the ongoing event of UFO contact, inclusive of the sighting, but also accompanying supernatural effects and events. Yeah, right. Amen. Right. That's just how it be. We got it. It's like planet Earth is a wild and crazy reality to live in, and it's a tough reality to live in, and it's also like a beautiful one, and like it's one that all the entities want to protect or are interested in. So we're lucky to be here just experiencing the 3D, right? Because if like reincarnation and all that's real, which I think that it is, we're just here, our souls, our psyches, consciousness, whatever you want to consider it, just wants to keep re-experiencing the 3D and learning these lessons over and over. But yeah, it's all such interesting stuff, and it's so crazy how it just ties in. It is there is such an important like religious aspect to UFOs, and that's why I think this author here, DW Pasulka, is such a good person to research the topic like she talks about, because it all connects. She's able to connect those historical dots with like, because like when we read in the Encyclopedia of Demonology and Witchcraft, when something weird would happen way back in the day, they just described it to demons, witches, or whatever it is. So you need someone who studied that history to kind of bring those little nuggets of historical sightings to the modern age, right? I don't know. Just makes sense. But back to it. The report suggests an emerging spiritual reorientation of global proportions. Jacques Vallée often states that the most significant aspect of the UFO event is not its physical trace, but its impact on society at the level of myth. In this sense, he sees the UFO working through subcultures throughout the world and even identifies this as a new form of religion. You will find people in the remote, so this is a quote from Jacques, you will find people in remote towns in California who have literally dropped out of city life. And this is like me. I was living deep in the heart of LA, where they had held responsible positions and enjoyed good salaries. Because they had received messages from space instructing them to do so, they would be regarded as perfectly square if it were not for the fact that their lives had been changed by what they considered to be a genuine extraterrestrial communication. I wish I had some extraterrestrial communication that told me to move out to the woods, but I didn't. But it's just funny. I relate to that first part. Just bugging out from the city. They would be One such man left Los Angeles with his family after a message he believes came from Jupiter that instructed him to find an isolated spot and live in semi-retirement, providing a center of peace in the world of intense turmoil that was to come. We are not here dealing with escapism. We are dealing with the next form of religion, quotes Jacques Vallée. The ensuing pages outline the lived realities of the practitioners of this new spiritual reorientation. While billionaires clamor to acquire UFO data to create new super technologies, and governments carefully manage the public perception of UFOs through new programs affiliated with major universities, witnesses and experiencers quietly continue to live the missions that they feel are uniquely theirs. Let's go. The new belief, the new believers. So that brings us to chapter 1, the space psychologist. We're starting off, this is called the space psychologist. This chapter, we're meeting a revolutionary space psychologist that's just turning the field of belief and reporting all the phenomenon that pilots and astronauts see, being able to making them feel comfortable in reporting them. But it starts off with a quote from Walter Benjamin from his book called To the Planetarium. Nothing distinguishes the ancient from the modern man so much as the former's absorption in the cosmic experience scarcely known to later periods. Men as a species completed their development thousands of years ago, but mankind as a species is just beginning his. In technology, a physicist, so it's like is beginning to be organized through which mankind's contact with the cosmos takes a new and different form from that which it had in nations and families. Ooh, future's gonna be cool. So next we're bringing you to a declassified transcript between two astronauts, John Young and Eugene Cerna, on Apollo 10. So here's the Apollo 10 crew. Apollo 10 was the second mission to orbit the moon. They didn't land on the moon. It was these three men right here. We're about to hear a declassified transcript, a radio transmission between Eugene Cerna, and he was the lander module pilot, the lunar module pilot, sorry, and then John Young, who was the command module pilot. So we're zooming in on a conversation between these two men. Okay, we have, let me go here. We have Eugene and John Young. Okay. Starts off here with Eugene. They're orbiting the moon at this point. Boy, that sure is some weird music. We're gonna have to find out about that. Nobody will believe us. Yes, it's whistling, like an outer space type thing. I don't know, but I tell you, that eerie music, it's what's bothering me. You know that. God damn, I heard it too. Well, that was funny. That's just like something from outer space, really. Who's going to believe it? Nobody. Shall we tell them about it? I don't know. We ought to think about it some. And there you have it. The classic tale of an anomalous report from an astronaut or a pilot. Very nervous at the end to tell anyone about it. These guys are out there in space, and all of a sudden they start hearing space music. Like that, like real sci-fi type music. So that was a declassified transcript of the Apollo 10 mission. It's a one-way ticket, Tyler D. said. He was lounging in the morning sunshine. The bright light reflected off his aviator glasses. I watched the sunbeams dance off his sunglasses while he told me about the imminent human exploration of Mars. We were in Palo Alto for a meeting with Dr. Gary Nolan and Jacques Vallée, two scientists with whom we worked on the topic of UFOs. Moon tunes, indeed. And we got to get a copy of them moon tunes. SpaceX's rocket had just exploded. So I don't know when, maybe this, how many years ago was this? I forget. Tyler's phone was in a constant flurry of notifications as astronauts and aerospace engineers asked him for advice. He reached for the phone and turned it off. For those of you who don't know, Tyler D is one of the author DW Pasulka's main sources. He works in mission control in NASA. He's an aeronautical engineer. And this is Tyler D. He just turned off his phone. SpaceX's rocket that they were sending off had just exploded. People are calling him, help us, Tyler, we need your advice. He just turns off his phone. He looks over at the author, says this, make sure you tell your kids, he said in reference to the Mars mission. They're at the prime age for targeted recruitment. So this next generation of kids, they're the ones who are going to be targeted for recruitment for the Mars mission. My oldest child was in 3rd grade. I considered his words. Tyler's affiliations with the space industry heavyweights like NASA and the aerospace industry, SpaceX, and the Department of Defense, and the U.S. Air Force, among others, provided him with access to credible information about marketing space programs and jobs to youth. His job as a mission controller at Cape Canaveral was one of the longest held by one individual. He commanded respect both inside and outside of the space industry. 8-year-old children, I thought? Whoever planned this campaign was on a long timeline. Yeah, man. They're on super long timelines. I knew that Tyler told me certain information because he had great affection for my children. Throughout the several years we worked together, he often told me things that he thought would benefit me as a mother. One of my favorite activities was to walk with my children at dusk. We would walk through the neighborhood and observe the wildlife in the American South. Raccoons, possums, and sometimes a stray cat or coyote would dart by. We'd talk to the neighbors as the darkness of night slowly replaced the yellow brightness of day. Ain't that beautiful? When Tyler warned me about the recruitment plan to which he had been privy, I didn't ask him to explain its details, because with all things he said to me, I had no way to verify this information. His job status prevented him from being completely transparent, and I didn't want my kids to aspire to go to Mars. However, at this point in human history, it was obvious that it would be a one-way ticket, just as he said. I returned home from Palo Alto during the dusk walk. I took the opportunity to talk to my kids about what I had learned. So you know that if you become an astronaut and sign to go to Mars, you will not come back, right? I mean, hey, might as well tell your kids early about this. It was early in the evening and about midway through our walk when I posited the question to my eldest daughter, the head of the pack. If she agreed, the younger ones would follow her lead. Okay, she chirped. My younger kids were probably confused or they didn't care, but at the time they had nodded in agreement. They enjoyed the walks as much as I did, and they liked Mr. Tyler and his stories. He used to tell them all about flying jet airplanes and launching rockets in Florida. They especially laughed hysterically at his stories about the Vomit Comet. And we're going to learn about what the Vomit Comet is right now. The Vomit Comet is a special airplane that helps astronauts acclimate to zero-gravity environments. It climbs to a very high elevation and drops into a free fall. During this period in which the plane drops, the astronauts in training float in the air, weightless, preparing their bodies and minds for what they will feel when they are in space. The Vomit Comet also makes people very sick. Human bodies unsurprisingly resist being plunged towards Earth at high speeds while they float around in a high-tech metal tube. Tyler holds a record for being the most ill of all people who have flown in the Vomit Comet. My kids screamed with laughter when he described being carted off the plane, unable to walk from vomiting. He spent the day in the hospital. He offered several times to get me a spot on the Vomit Comet, but I declined. Currently, non-astronauts can purchase the pleasure of this experience through a company called the Zero Gravity Corporation. Being weightless, I learned, was the least traumatic experience astronauts face while traveling in space. Approximately 600 astronauts have left Earth's atmosphere, and from this new vantage point have gazed back at their home planet. No other group of people in human history have had this view. That's just crazy to me. Like, there are billions of people on the planet. There have been billions of people who've come before us, and only 600 of those people have had the view of our beautiful blue pearl, at least at the time of this writing this book, of Mother Earth from outer space. That has to be such an experience that can only be experienced from experiencing that experience. No other group of people in human history have had this view. This literal shift in worldview is often accompanied by shock, awe, dread, and sometimes trauma and personal transformation. To see the Earth as a blue globe suspended in a black backdrop of what appears to be infinite space in every direction engenders a lot of different emotions. Two of the most common emotions appear to be entirely new to human consciousness. That's what I love. Feelings we can't even describe because you can't experience them on Earth. Feelings you can only experience in freaking space. Or so unfamiliar that astronauts have had a hard time finding words to describe them. Physicist Rosalind Yalow noted, New truths become evident when new tools become available. Yep. It's super powerful. It's got to be one of the most powerful things that could happen to a human just in like from physically seeing something, you know? And we're what's cool is this chapter we're going to learn all about that right now, and the people who are studying this effect and this new level of consciousness. It's like these astronauts come back and they're different. They're changed after you see this view. And there's a celebrity. There's a fun celebrity we're going to learn about that also changed after his little trip. Okay. New truths become evident when new tools become available. Technological tools like rockets, space capsules, rovers, and technologies that extend human senses to the surface of Mars and places that are far away from Earth bring about new experiences and new truths and mental states. This novel consciousness, which astronauts find difficult to describe, requires a new vocabulary or requires the remembrance of a lost vocabulary. That's what I like to think about, our ancient selves being more connected to this global consciousness. Some of the terms that have been used to describe these new mental states are found in the history of religions. When astronaut Edgar Mitchell saw Earth from his tiny capsule floating through space, his mental state altered so much that it changed his life and its direction. He returned to Earth determined to find an explanation for his electrifying experience. His search was not easy, but he finally found the only thing that came close to a description was the ecstatic experience illustrated in the Hindu and Buddhist sacred text called the Samadhi, which is the feeling in body and mind of being completely connected with all that is, and that is all, with all reality. So that feeling of being connected with everything that is in reality, the Samadhi, I believe that's how you pronounce it. So very interesting, right? These astronauts are going to space, reaching a new level of consciousness that's only new to us. It's actually an ancient level of consciousness that has existed since time immortal, and that is the realization that we are all and everything, and actually being able to feel that when you see the Earth from that perspective. So that's really cool. He comes back, and the only place he finds the similar feeling is in ancient Hindu and Buddhist texts. Go figure. Since the 19th century, scholars of religion have worked out vocabularies to describe rare and sublime states that people who experience them ironically describe as indescribable. The sacred text of Taoism famously begins with this paradox: the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao, right? And that's like the hardest thing when you start trying to, like, you know, take that inward journey or whatever you want to call it, is all these simple truths you have to reckon with are the most simple of simple truths, but the understanding them and truly living them is the hardest of the hard things, because you can't be told it. You have to feel it. The Tao that is told is not the true Tao. I love that quote. That's a beautiful quote. Interesting stuff. I mean, not that I even really understand that quote, but I'm telling you, I do not, but it feels good. If that makes sense. Early 20th century German scholar of religion Rudolf Otto called these experiences numinous. The numinous is the feeling of being in the presence of awesome power, which is simultaneously mysterious, dreadful, fascinating, and difficult to describe. A common assumption is that the religious or spiritual experiences are uplifting and filled with joy. Data from the archives of the religious studies reveal a more complicated story. Most people are completely unhinged by their forays into spiritual experiences. As the stories of the prophets of the Hebrew Bible illustrate, if God knocks in the middle of the night, prophets jump ship. They run the other way, and sometimes, such as in the prophet of Jonah's case, literally. However, the stories also reveal one cannot escape a force like God. And this reminds me of the Andreessen affair, right? When we meet an extra dimensional intelligence, or an intelligence that's not human, it's terrifying. It's not very fun. That's why it's that classic quote. I remember the meme when it's like biblically accurate angels or whatever it is. The quote is "Be not afraid," right? That's the grinning man. In this experience, we talked about this today. This terrifying, if you missed it this morning, not this morning, earlier in the stream, this man right here, this is the grinning man. He ran into this dude on a West Virginian road one night in the 60s. This man rolled down his window and was terrified. The grinning man spoke to him after it walked off a UFO. The grinning man spoke to him without moving its mouth telepathically, was sitting there with this fat grin. And what did the grinning man say? Don't be afraid. We're here to help. So that's just such a common message of be not afraid. But our consciousness can't handle that. We're like, ah! What am I seeing? The incongruity of what one expects from the experience of being in space compared to what one has experienced is richly illustrated by none other than the most beloved starship captain, and that is Captain Kirk, old William Shatner. I totally forgot to get a picture of him for the stream tonight, but if you don't know who William Shatner is, go ahead, Google the man. Check out some of his great acting on the original Star Trek, and some of his, he hosts a paranormal show too, and he has great funny little quips. He's like America's grandpa. Anywho, Jeff Bezos took him to space, and he had quite the experience. Let's read about that. Captain Kirk of the famous television series Star Trek, otherwise known as actor William Shatner. Shatner, 90 years old at the time, an OG, had never been to space. So space entrepreneur Jeff Bezos, owner of the Blue Origin, invited him to fly to space in the company's space capsule in October of 2021. Shatner's experience was filled with wonder and trauma. I was crying, Shatner said. I didn't know what I was crying about. I had to go off to someplace and sit down and think, what's the matter with me? And I realized I was in grief. It was the death that I saw in space and the life force that I saw coming from the planet. The blue, the beige, and the white. And I realized one was death and the other was life. The Shatman goes up there experiencing just how something beautiful. He starts uncontrollably crying the moment he sees our beautiful blue pearl. He says he sees death and life emanating from our beautiful little planet, death surrounding it in space. Shatner expected to be elated, but he was instead reduced to tears. His words illustrate feelings of dread, fear, and respect, as he describes space as a funeral and Earth as life. Shatner had a classic brush with the numinous. How are we, the recipients of fellow nano-astronauts' testimony about the new frontier, supposed to process this frightful information? As fate would have it, this question is answered by none other than a scientist whose job was forged within the rapid pace of the space and aeronautics industry. Dr. Aya Whiteley is a British space psychologist born in Latvia, and whose mission is to support pilots and astronauts as they enter these extreme environments. Her task is to design tools and training for happy and efficient living and working in Earth's orbit, on the moon, and on return missions to Mars, working out what the crew may face on missions beyond our Earth's orbit. I had developed the Psi Matrix, where over 36 groups of challenges are systematically assessed, which include how to acclimate to new mental states and how to acclimate to new mental states and to the shock of a new consciousness. Because you really have to be ready to go to space. You got to be prepped, baby. So, we're going to learn about the author's first contact with Dr. Aya. And we're exploring this aspect of space psychology. I think the author of this book, because she's miles smarter than me, of course, who's wrote this dope-ass book, but getting us ready for what we're about to experience, what we're about to read about, the other intelligences we're about to learn about. So this space psychologist helps astronauts deal with the untold wonder of this new consciousness breaking through to them, right? Going from being, like we learned about in the introduction, an atheist to a true believer. So it's very interesting. Dr. Aya Whitley contacted me through a series of emails in 2020. The subject line of the emails caught my attention right away. Space psychologist, researcher at University in London, developing communication means with unknown phenomena. What? Who was this? I thought as I quickly searched her name on the internet. I read her university biography, Dr. Aya Whiteley, a space psychologist, exploring the human mind to develop our abilities and to realize our potential while we explore outer space. I thought it was bold and even brave for an established space scientist and academic to reach out to me in her own name about a means of communication with an unknown phenomena. The unknown phenomena I had been known to research were UFOs. What was the catch? I thought. Perhaps there was none, but years of doing research into UFOs and the beliefs of scientists, most of who want to remain anonymous regarding the topic, had accustomed me to persevere or at least expect anonymity of scientific UFO researchers. I responded enthusiastically to her first email, and then I didn't hear from her for weeks. I thought she had reconsidered reaching out. Then one day I received another note. I opened it to find that she had been in South America in February and March of 2020. I was there doing research in our common interest, she said later. The COVID-19 pandemic had caused a shutdown of the borders in the countries in which she was traveling, and she was trying to get back to England where she lived and worked. Each subsequent email arrived from a different country. She was flying from country to country with the borders closing behind her one by one, with no knowledge of when or if the borders would open again. Her situation, which I observed with horror through my computer in the safe environment of my home, was extreme. She later explained that relative to many experiences from her life, hopping from country to country as the pandemic was spreading was not so difficult. Oh yeah, we're about to learn. Dr. Aya is a badass. I'm a pilot. I jump from flying airplanes. I'm a champion skydiver. I scuba dive and research in extreme environments so I can understand what goes through the minds of people working and making split-second decisions. I support the needs of people in these environments, and I need to have these experiences myself so I can best help them, she said. And that's what I love about this scientist we're learning about in this chapter. She's an actual badass, like the test pilots and astronauts she talks to. She knows what it's like to make a split-second fly by the seat of your pants decision that can affect your life, just like pilots do. Very rare attitude, right? And the only person who should be studying the only type of person who should be studying this shit and helping people become the best pilots and explorers that they can be, and to deal with the extraordinary shit they're going to see out there. Aya studied psychology and computer science, the novel field of study called cognitive engineering, putting together complex information onto electronic displays for modern aircrafts. Among her other tasks, using voice analysis technology that she co-invented to provide early detection of fatigue and to monitor the well-being of astronauts in extreme environments. She explained that as astronauts get farther and farther from Earth, they would form their own rules, beliefs, and behaviors, and at times, without any discussion, would form an understanding of what was acceptable and what was not acceptable. That is wild to me. The further your consciousness gets away from the earthbound restrictions, the more it opens up and just starts creating its own rules. That's so wild. It was through Aya that I learned about the psychology of space travel and the new forms of consciousness that appear to develop within these new environments. Documented psychological states that are specific to space travel include the overview effect, which has received the most publicity, and the less glamorous state described by William Shatner, which appears to be an encounter with the numinous. The overview effect was described by space theorist and author Frank White in the 1980s, and at that time, there were enough astronauts who reported similar feelings about being in space and seeing Earth from space to identify an initial pattern. White observed, the overview effect is the experience of seeing Earth from a distance, especially from orbit or the moon, and realizing the inherent unity and oneness of everything on the planet. The effect represents a shift in perception, wherein the viewer moves from identification with parts of the Earth to identification with the whole system, the next step of human consciousness. Astronaut, that's just my thought. I'm adding that in there. Not the author didn't say that. Astronaut Russell Switchwoodcart described his experience as if he were part of the Earth as a type of sensing instrument. When you go around the Earth in an hour and a half, you begin to recognize that your identity is with the whole thing and that it makes a change. It comes through you, to you so powerfully that you're the sensing element for man. We are the sensing elements of Earth. We are the tools of Mother Earth. We are the scientific instruments. We're the ones that can sense and manipulate. And I think that's what the astronaut's saying. After White described the effect, he and public intellectuals like Carl Sagan thought that the testimonies of astronauts about the effect, as well as photographs taken from the moon of Earth, might replicate in a small way the same experience for people on Earth. White and others conjectured that if people felt this effect, they might identify with their planet like the astronauts did and choose to take care of it and maybe even each other. The hopeful interpretation has continued to inspire contemporary movements and organizations such as the Overview Institute, which funds educational programs about the positive effects of space travel, as well as the creation of immersive virtual environments intended to replicate the effect. I feel like no picture or virtual environment could actually replicate the overview effect. You'd have to, I feel like it's something you have to go and experience yourself, right? The Institute hopes that it can bring this shift in consciousness, which so far has only been identified in some astronauts, to Earth-bound millions. Okay, so it doesn't happen to all astronauts. This is some astronauts. So if I said it happens to all, I'll retract that. But having this shift in consciousness, if we brought it to the Earthbound billions, us losers, us Earthbound losers, oh, that would change everything. Immersive environments have not been able to accurately replicate the effect, however. Many astronauts said that the feeling was visceral and that the photographs do not accurately convey the actual experience. A more complicated mental state that can afflict astronauts is the feeling I had described as non-conforming, which increases the further away they travel from Earth in their space capsules. Again, this may appear to us who remain on Earth as irrational, but Aya noted it was completely acceptable given the circumstances the crew might experience. The training astronauts undergo is famously rigorous and intense, and ideally would include situations wherein crew may see their mates go through changes in their belief systems. Additionally, astronauts are chosen because they fit specific personality profiles, along with stringent physical and mental training. They also take a barrage of personality tests. Scientists, psychologists like Aya are trained to identify candidates who can flourish in extreme environments. She's one of the people who picks the astronauts. Given these circumstances, it is not surprising that astronauts are impeccable at self-control, especially with respect to their emotions. Feelings like dread, fear, and panic would go undetected by their team and even themselves. Additionally, so they don't even themselves register when they're feeling fear and panic. Interesting. Rare breed. Additionally, space equipment, including capsules and habitats, are worth billions of dollars. So a fatigued or irrational astronaut who might act unpredictably is a very real concern for space institutions. That costs them a lot of money, baby. The consequences of this so far unnamed mental state are very real and potentially dangerous. In the United States, space station Skylab, this bad boy right here, look at that, a real life space station. Skylab 4, the astronauts on board at one point just stopped working. They reported that they were unable to maintain their scheduled tasks and duties as they were so confused by their new, baffling, fascinating, unprecedented experiences of floating around in space. EA led the European Space Agency study that systematically defined how best to prepare, monitor, and prevent psychological issues that arise during exploration missions to the moon and Mars. She defined technologies and techniques to address the and the identified psychological needs of the astronauts in order to sustain their mental health and stamina. In extreme environments and exploration missions, prevention is key. With a colleague, she developed technology to detect what astronauts themselves and mission control are unable to detect, such as the onset of fatigue and the effects of extended sleep deprivation that can play tricks on the mind and perception. These devices decipher hints of fatigue in the voices of astronauts. Safety is the priority, and identifying changes in the crew that may compromise safety and put the mission in jeopardy is vital. The aim is to prevent any situation that could cost the crew's lives and endanger the very expensive equipment. Aya led projects to develop Epsilon, the embedded psychological support integrated for long-duration missions. That's what Epsilon stands for. A tool set for exploration expeditions to the moon and Mars. And she designed tools to help the crews resolve challenges that emerge in new alien environments, particularly those where there is no live communication with Earth. Aya's work contributed to a change in the culture of pilots reporting automation anomalies, and was instrumental in identifying the many forms of consciousness that are produced in space environments. She is our best interpreter of the global shift in perspective, which had been mere thoughts and speculations in the minds of philosophers and futurists who saw these developments years and years before she was born. So, now it's time to talk about the 21st century interface with hyperobjects, the mind shift. In 1917, German Jewish intellectual Walter Benjamin wrote a short essay on the consequences for humanity, a shift in perspective towards celestial objects. He wrote that the sight of celestial objects like the billions of stars in the Milky Way had always occurred from the perspective of a community, like a tribe or a family. He wrote that now that the sight of the heavens would become increasingly singular as human beings increase their abilities to see celestial objects through technologies like telescopes. In a brief 2-page essay, To the Planetarium, which was a quote we read earlier, Benjamin made several predictions and observations. First, he mourned the loss of the communal experience of seeing the stars with family and friends. This, he said, had been a shared ecstatic experience. He predicted that technology would bring humanity a new view that never existed before. In that sense, he described technology as a physis, which is something organic, bound to happen in the development. Physis describes an inevitable process, like the development of an apple seed into an apple. Benjamin identified this historic shift, but as all things that uncannily forecast a future reality, it wasn't completely right. As astronauts leave Earth and view space, many do experience ecstasy, and people on Earth have a taste for it too. But it's still a communal experience. But it is also something that Benjamin couldn't have predicted. It is an interface with the truly alien. Astronauts who leave Earth often describe something like Otto's idea of the numinous. These emotions include fear, trembling, and respect. The consciousness of space travel is so new that researchers have just begun to make headway in understanding what is happening to spacefarers and what it could possibly mean for the billions of Earthbound people. What does it mean that many astronauts describe experiences that resemble those described by mystics of past religious and spiritual traditions? Anthropologist Dina Wiebel analyzes the reports of astronauts' experiences in space and how they impact their cosmologies or views on the universe. She addresses the overview effect, but also identifies another state, which she coined the ultraview effect. The ultraview effect incorporates the more perplexing and disturbing aspects of these new experiences. She explores the way in which encountering the Earth and other celestial objects in ways never before experienced by human beings has influenced astronauts' cosmological understandings. Wiebel recognized that there was considerable overlap between astronauts' descriptions and those described by scholar Timothy Morton with respect to hyperobjects. Morton wrote that hyperobjects are objects that exist yet are almost unfathomable to comprehend. So that's like thinking about the star factories or nebulas. We've seen pictures of those, but really our brain can't fathom how big they are. We would be completely blown away and our brains scrambled if we saw one. We can't begin to fathom how big celestial. Oh, what up? welcome on in. I don't have my headphones on, so I can't hear you if you're trying to talk to me. But welcome in. We're reading from Encounters by DW Pasulka, and we're learning about hyperobjects and space psychologies. So welcome on in. Nice to see it. Back to the space psychologist. We're learning how to the next level of consciousness that's coming in the future is being able to deal with celestial objects, things that are called hyperobjects. And there's been some scientists that have been studying it. Here's what they got to say about it. There exists a reality to certain huge objects or systems that is a separate from humanity's ability to perceive them. While human beings throughout the ages have had a slow but increasing awareness of large objects, like the globe or the ocean, for example, Morton specifically used hyperobject to refer to massively distributed entities that can be thought or computed but not directly touched or seen, meaning our main awareness of them is achieved through the use of technology, i.e. when we look at pictures of space, pictures of the star factories, the nebulas, all that good stuff. The cognition of hyperobjects through technology, both at the micro level enabled by the use of computers which can model objects in other dimensions, and at the macro level with the use of telescopes and space capsules to view massive objects in space, which are encountered within the seemingly infinite substrate of space, constitutes the historic moment in which we live now. This is the historical moment at which hyperobjects become visible by humans. The visibility changes everything. Although Benjamin did not include hyperobjects, which are almost incomprehensible to human cognition, within his description of this shift, he certainly captured the spirit of the epoch that was about to begin. Significantly, Plato identified hyperobjects with the use of math. Math and the technologies and computer languages that create them is the bridge to this new shift in perspective. Math, it's a spiritual thing that is a part of everything. Math is the one universal language. Morton characterizes the emotions aroused by encountering these objects as pain and disgust. Weibel's analysis reveals an experience more in the line with Otto's idea of the numinous. She notes, our familiar illusions are replaced with a frightening perception of something truly alien. This new sight, in other words, initiates a shift in worldview. This consciousness of what is truly alien reorients those who encounter it. Russell Schweikart, the astronaut we talked about earlier, described himself as a literal instrument, a sensing element for man. When he was floating in space, that's what he felt. Old Russell thought he became the instrument for Mother Earth to sensing these feelings. Edgar Mitchell, another astronaut, felt a palpable experience of divinity and connection in space that led to a lifelong exploration of the noetic transmission of knowledge. The new consciousness, powerfully felt and embodied by these two astronauts, suggests that the human body and mind confronted with hyperobjects in space undergoes a process of reception and consciousness that they are compelled to transmit to others. Researchers who study the psychological states of astronauts observe that, just as Otto remarked about the encounter with the numinous, awe can transform people and reorient their lives, goals, and values, given the stability of personality and values. Awe-inducing events may be one of the fastest and most powerful methods of personal change and growth. People have, and that makes sense with a lot of people we've read who've had encounters with creatures like the Mothman, right? They go through a complete spiritual reorientation after they have these wild encounters. And for the most part, people don't even like to share these experiences. That's why when we get deeper into this book and we read about some of the wild and crazy encounters people have had with UFOs and interdimensional beings, they use pseudonyms because they don't want to bring the ridicule on themselves. Among those who experienced these alien mental states, some were struck with the feeling of that extraterrestrial life is inevitable. Weibel's sensitive elaboration of an Apollo astronaut experience illustrates the shift in worldview. So this is a direct experience from one of the Apollo astronauts. Looking at the universe out there from my vantage point, I begin to realize that we don't know crap about anything. We really don't. At some point in my orbit around the moon, I was sheltered from both the Earth and the sun, so I was in complete darkness. All of a sudden, The star patterns out there became something that I was not ready for. So many stars, I couldn't just see just one, just a sheet of light. I don't know whether you'd call it a spiritual or not, but when I saw the star field out there in a way that nobody else has ever seen, I had some pretty profound thoughts. We are not unique in the universe. When I came back from my flight, we were all totally exhausted. I'd sit in my living room and all these thoughts would come flowing through. So I began writing them down. They flowed from my mind through a pen onto a piece of paper. It was like I was being guided by something. As with people who have had UFO experiences, Zach, a pseudonym, reviewed and then revised his own religious tradition, which was a Protestant. What he had thought of as angels before, he now understood as cosmic entities. This interpretive move is called the sacred text. This interpretive move is called the sacred text UFO hermeneutic. I'll have to look up the pronunciation of that word, but it's spelled Hermeneutic. I think it's like hermit almost, but hermeneutic. And is common among religious UFO experiencers. But that's basically just a shift in your belief from the old of like the angels, demons, ghosts, ghoulies, whatever, to the new of cosmic entities. After the shock of either seeing a UFO or having an experience that opens one to the possibility that extraterrestrial life exists, a person from a religious background will often review their tradition and identify contact events between people and divinities as extraterrestrial. Even atheists and agnostics undergo a similar process. After his trip to space, William Shatner, who is not religious, shared his belief that we are not alone. And here's a quote from the Shatman himself. Now, if you weren't with us earlier, William Shatner, famous actor from the old Star Trek, great funny man too. Well, I think funny unintentionally, but anywho, William Shatner, he was invited to go to space by Jeff Bezos on his Blue Origin or whatever space program that he has. William Shatner was 90 years old at the time. When he went up to space, he thought he was gonna have this beautiful, elating, like happy experience. The moment he saw the view of Earth, he started uncontrollably crying. He had to go cry in the corner of the little space capsule, and he realized that space was death and Earth was life. He felt a beautiful life emanating from Earth and felt nothing but death from the darkness of space. So very interesting experience. Here's a quote from old Willie Shatner after he went up to space. Old Billiam. "It's impossible for this to be the only world," Shatner explained. "There are other intelligent entities out there, probably since life is so ardent. There's such passion in life that it's everywhere, and everything in life has passion to live. So you think that it's only on this rocky planet?" Right, dude? Isn't that true, Tag? I love that. It is. It's very beautiful. This astronaut stuck in between Earth and the moon, sheltered from the sun in complete darkness, realizes that we are not alone, seeing this complete star field out there. The view that no one else has ever had. Except maybe other astronauts who've taken that orbit, right? In the population of people who are not astronauts, these experiences often produce two data sets. Academics and ufologists who hear testimony of people who have had extreme experiences, such as being a witness to a UFO event, relate that there were often two types of reports by their very people who reported. People tended to report different things depending on whom they were speaking to. People often report empirical evidence, things seen and heard, to authorities and academics, and then report what they experienced subjectively to their families. They do this because of the fear of being ridiculed, which is very real. When the astronauts heard that, so remember in the beginning of our of this chapter, we read a declassified transcript between two astronauts on Apollo 10, where they described hearing eerie space music out in space. They said it sounded eerie and sci-fi like. So they're like, what the heck is this? And they didn't want to report it to anyone, and they didn't. We had to go through the files and find this transmission and then declassify it for all of us to figure out about it. So Remember back to the when the astronauts heard what they called eerie space music on the Apollo 10 mission. They decided not to report it. As they said, who's going to believe it? They thought it was absurd. Space-type music in space? Their fear of ridicule impacts the data needed to assess space environments. So we'll never be able to, and that the point here being, we'll never be able to really explore space unless we're completely honest with what we've experienced out there, and people who experience weird phenomena out there are able to share their experiences, so we could fold that into one of the plethora of experiences that happens to the human consciousness when we fucking go out, when we become no longer earthbound, when we reach the next level. What's unique and potentially innovative about studies on astronauts is the sheer amount of data that astronauts provide and the techniques used to extract it. Astronauts are data mines for the aerospace industry. So all information from psychological data to emotional and psychological, from psychological data to emotional and psychological data is expected from them and extracted by experts. A psychologist with specializations like Aya's is aware when people are hiding information. Aya knows that astronauts are rational, so if they expose a newfound belief in alien life, she receives it as data. This neutral observation, apparently so simple, is in actuality a radical innovation in the method of method with transformative potential. So basically, in layman's terms, just believing people when they tell you crazy stories is transformative, and it allows people to report even more. Most academics, if they do study the topic of UFOs, couch reports of disbelief in extraterrestrial life with references to the credibility of the person who reports the event. In Weibel's assessment of Zach, a pseudonym for one of the astronauts, newfound worldview, she writes that he is a rational person, a successful author and businessman, but his unconventional religious beliefs were absolutely influenced by his time and space, which, he said, changed his idea of infinity and his whole outlook. The unconventional religious belief is his idea that we are not unique in the universe. Weibel is not alone in her citation of the credibility of the witness. I have done this with all my writings about the topic of UFOs. It is a natural reaction to a culture of silence and ridicule. With respect to the culture of ridicule, the potential benefit of Aya's method for the culture that surrounds UFOs should not be underestimated. If applied, it will be revolutionary. We'll have people reporting everything, which is what's happening now, which is sweet. Okay, we're winding down. We got a few pages left in the chapter here on the space psychologist. Shifting the culture of silence from aviation to UFOs. Aya speaks with an Eastern European English inflected accent. Her intelligence is striking and could potentially intimidate anyone. Yet she is disarmingly kind and down to earth. No doubt this combination of traits has inspired the confidence of thousands of pilots and many astronauts. I worked with pilots during my PhD and adapted a method I called iView Expert, she said. It's intended to bring proverbial memory to the surface of consciousness. There's proverbial knowing and professional intuition that experts are unaware they know or can share. They know what to do, but filter it out depending on the audience. Why do they do it? They ignore sharing the most precious intuition that as in the case of a surgeon, if passed down to another surgeon, can save someone's life. That is the question that my method helps fix, helping us all access that power of knowledge we have in our consciousness. The interesting aspect here is that most experts do not even realize or are not conscious of the fact that they carry expert knowledge. They do not know how to share it, or they think they already do share their expertise, but apparently not fully. This is exactly where the precious jewels of knowledge hide and must be passed down on to help us thrive as a society. I had watched Aya speak at a conference of aerospace experts. The topic was aviation safety and optimization. I noticed that Aya's contributions were always creative and novel. She mentioned that instead of designing cockpit, now this is what I thought was really interesting. I never thought about this in airplane design. Instead of designing cockpits according to the engineering logic, engineers should take into consideration pilot logic, as the aircraft would be flown by pilots and not engineers. Pilots should dictate the design. Luckily, now part of the design process are human factors experts like Aya, who read pilots' minds in order to make the flying process seamless for them. This is how I received the United States Air Force Research Laboratory Award and was able to disseminate my research in the United States at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Boeing, and NASA. The idea is for the pilot to feel the aircraft and think it is reading the pilot's mind and only gives the absolute bare minimum of information to assist in making prompt and accurate decisions. So like the pilot and the plane becoming one, essentially. Much like in anyone's favorite anime or cartoon show about futuristic battle robots that humans get into, and you meld with like the movie Pacific Rim, right? Where your mind is melded with your big robot, and the deeper your connection with that, the better you are able to work your combat bot or whatever the fuck it is. So interesting. That's what they're trying to do right now with airplanes. That's what Dr. Aya is working on, making it intuitive. Because an engineer's brain and a pilot's brain, I feel like completely different. You're using completely different genius, completely different types of genius, right? The idea. The challenge for human factors experts is that truly talented pilots fly by the seat of their pants, like Matthew McConaughey in Interstellar, baby, and are not talkative about how they do it. Pilots get thrown hundreds of bits of information at them in a split second. Choose the right ones and store the rest for later to be recalled. And they make it look easy maneuvering these beastly machines as if they are toys. If indeed pilots look like they are enjoying flying and not making any mistakes, this is when Aya's job is done well. She also mentioned that all information needs to be intuitive and natural to observe. For example, she said that safety notifications should be audio and tonal so that if pilots or astronauts hear disharmony, they will immediately be alerted to an issue. Her research methods were so successful that they eventually permeated the aviation industry. I started my research into the misinterpretation of information, and I read reports of aviation accidents and problems. Sometimes they'd come in every week, Aya said. The era of safety culture and no blame, no shame reporting was just beginning. At the time, and a new type of technology was being introduced into aviation. We went from analog cockpits, clock-like instruments, to computer screens, or glass cockpits as they're called. I developed coherent principles for information presentation on aircraft displays to prevent errors. This was only possible due to the bravery of pilots who began to report what they saw or their confusion about things. Slowly, pilots began to record incidents because they were not being punished or fired, and there were comprehensive investigations of aerial accidents, right? So very interesting to think about the evolution of the airplane industry just in general. Before, there was a culture of silence, even around accidents. Pilots didn't want to report any anomalies because they would just get chewed out and fired or whatever it was. So you have to create an environment of acceptance in reporting strange anomalies for these things to ever be reported, which is why we are just entering a dawn of that right now, with the CIA opening up a bit more and more pilots coming forward about what they've experienced in the sky. And Dr. Aya here is at the forefront of all that. Aya describes the culture of silence that permeated the vast industries of aviation. I heard about this socially sanctioned industry practice from pilots, one astronaut and Tyler, who, like Aya, worked directly with astronauts. I wrote about it. Yeah, right? Me and my visitor, by the way, I love, if you could hear me, visitor, I love your gas mask. It is freaking beautiful. We got some nice gas masks on. We're matching in that regard. I love it. But yeah, very true tag. Great look, visitor. And welcome. This is such a rare treat to have someone hanging out in the hot tub. This happens maybe 0.5% of the time. So thank you, beautiful visitor. You're very welcome. Okay, so anywho, moving. So DW wrote about this culture of silence around anomalies. It's like a Fight Club environment. It's in reference to the novel by the same name, Chuck Palahniuk, in which a culture of men is bound by a strict rule of silence. Until very recently, as Aya indicated, pilots were discouraged from reporting abnormalities or things that suggested they were possibly confused by data presented on screens in their environment. UFOs were strictly off limits with respect to being reported. The culture of no reporting any abnormalities led to accidents and deaths of thousands of people. Aya was on the edge of the new culture of accepting all reports, even of things unknown. Aya shared a report on aviation safety statistics. I could see that the number of aviation-related fatalities decreased significantly and indeed followed the timeline of cultural shift that Aya described. The shift included, among other things, the decentralization of information. Instead of a hierarchy of reports, teams worked together to address problems. For the first time, the investigation team included all types of experts from aviation and airplane policy groups to management, aircraft repair mechanics, airport staff, and cabin crew. Also, they included representatives from trade unions and data scientists. The problems were no longer just recorded as pilot error. A lot of the errors were due to pilots being put under extreme pressure from management to save fuel. For example, they were punished for flying extra circuits around the airport. They did this because they were unsure of the state of the aircraft or the runway. But they were pressured not to do this to save fuel. Over the long period of time and due to combinations of conflicting types of pressure, it appears that some pilots committed suicide due to being disrespected by the company and their colleagues or due to family pressure. The importance, right? The importance of having an accepting environment. And this reminds me when we read Mind Reach and psychic ability. Psychic ability shrinks when the environment's not accepting, right? It just completely goes away. Shrinks up, shrivels up. Same thing here. All these reports, no one would report any anomalies. Planes would still be crashing like a motherfucker. Thousands of people would still be dying. But thanks to people like Dr. Aya and revolutionizing this culture of silence, now we have a total shift in aviation safety. And we talk about all this because it's the perspective shift that needs to happen to start understanding interdimensional entities and accepting that these wild things are out there and are real. All of these types of pressures begin to dissolve, she said. The culture of safe reporting started to take hold as an online worldwide database confirmed the misinterpretation of information, and management-related pressures were widespread and similar in nature. I was one of many scientists able to work through the data and distill the common threads, and then I started to address them. The timeline for the shift in culture was a generation. This cultural change within the industry took 25 years, which is the length of one professional life, Aya said. She also noticed that as older professionals leave, the new generation sees that it is okay to report errors. They do not have the experiences of seeing colleagues being punished for preventing indices or accidents. And that reminds me of what's going on in UFOs, right? All the new generation of people that work in the government aren't afraid to expose the secrets, so that's why more secrets are coming out now. They do not have the experiences of seeing colleagues being punished for preventing accidents. Hence, the new generation persists with a new culture of safety reporting. Of course, the new generation is not new. It is now a very much established reporting culture. I see the need for the same steps to take place to develop the UFO safety reporting culture. She said, I have studied pilots and astronauts. They are different populations. With pilots, it's easy for me to identify what is being unsaid. With astronauts, they are now trained for public speaking and social media interaction so well that I often do not see what is unsaid. There is a wall. There is a pause in our conversation. And then she added, and I'm pretty good at reading people. After this conversation, I thought about her last words. I felt that I knew very well about the wall she identified. It is the reason why Tyler D is a pseudonym and why Tyler D uses a pseudonym and continues to be for the foreseeable future. It is the reason that very public people with affiliations like Tyler's always give away some information to the public but hold back, citing their clearances. I had heard that astronauts had to sign non-disclosure agreements. I once asked Tyler why this was the case. The answer was obvious to him, and he knew it should be to me too, but I asked anyway. Because they see shit in space, he said, as a matter of fact. Like, I want to know, God, it'd be so interesting to really read all the reports of what's been seen in space. That, I don't know, the astronauts reporting the space music is so cool. Because they see shit in space, he said, as a matter of fact. I had asked him this question in 2018, and between then and now, things have changed completely. Now that other countries are in space, not just Russia and the United States, whatever it is that may have been hidden from the public will now be inevitably visible. The cultural shift is no longer an option. Aya proposes a way forward. In collaboration, we discussed the two categories of reports that overlap but are also distinct. I shared my research data and contacts. I explained that there appeared to be a sphere of influence when sightings were reported. One dataset from Australia clearly revealed that people had reported experiences with beings that they associated with crafts, but had not seen the crafts themselves. Independent reports, verified by local police stations, revealed that multiple witnesses from the same location who do not know each other reported crafts during the same time period, that other people saw beings or had strange dreams. All of that is connected in the area. If there's lights, other people might be seeing beings, other people might be having insanely vivid dreams or visions. Therefore, in many instances, there is a sphere of influence that impacts people who have not seen a craft but are in the vicinity of where crafts have been sighted. I introduced Aya to naval personnel who had been in the vicinity of the UFOs that had been reported by the Air Force pilots and on radar. Although these personnel did not see actual craft, they experienced vivid dreams and had contact with beings they believed were associated with the crafts. If the matter was just one of reporting an unknown craft in the sky, the cultural shift would be less complicated. The fact that people are seeing and experiencing things that are completely out of the ordinary and are the topic of cultural stigmatization requires a creative strategy to move forward. There are brave men and women who set precedent in terms of reporting UFOs, yet if there are no further additional measures of positive reinforcement introduced, it would take another professional generation, approximately 25 years of professional life, to change their current climate and culture to one of openness and acceptance. If this has to be done in 2 professional generations, one being for UFOs and then one for intelligent beings in contact with us, we are looking at 45 to 50 years. People, we don't got time for that, all right? We can't wait 50 years for this shift to happen. I want it to happen now. We got to believe now. But that's interesting. So we tell this long story of the shift in the reporting culture in aviation. It took 25 years for pilots to really report anomalies they experienced, for flying to become much safer for us. So by that argument, it might take a good 50 years for us first to believe in craft, right? That's first. That's the easy thing to believe in. That's what Alan J. Hynek, the grandpapa of UFO science, believed in first. First, he believed in the craft. And then later, the belief in aliens, contactees, and alien abduction came. But that first was the belief in the craft. So then beyond that, it's going to take another 25 years for the acceptance of interdimensional beings, extraterrestrial beings, whatever you want to call them. This would be too long for people who have already been dealing with the consequences of contact. Such a loss of professional standing, loss of income, loss of families, and even more drastic, children losing parents and children experiencing contact without the acceptance and support of others. To put this into perspective, if people do fall into PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, or depression as a result of not being accepted, or if their professional experience as trained observers is questioned, their consequences are devastating. There are further problems for the younger generation in our society if their parents are struggling with depression. Diana, she said, that's the author's name. Diana, she said, time is what we do not have to assist those who are already going through these life-changing experiences now. I listened to the urgency in Dr. Aya's voice. Just after our conversation, I felt motivated to introduce her to people involved in the task force called the Human Factors UAP, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, committee organized by the Air Force pilot who had been making news about UFOs in the United States airspace. I was reassured to know that Aya, who has made such a necessary improvement to safety within the culture of aviation, was now going to attempt to do the same for UFO reports. We need you, Dr. Aya. Get in there, change the game, and those who make them. The generational shift that Aya had been instrumental in achieving is gaining momentum. Perhaps there will come a day when scientists who study UFOs will not need to call this research their hobby. It turns out that Aya's hobby research is even more interesting than her noteworthy accomplishments in aeronautics and aviation. It also sheds light on aspects of UFO events that are not commonly emphasized. These include non-ordinary mental states that suggest a form of extended cognition to an organic information network. And that, my friends, is the introduction in Chapter 1. Join me in the hot tub in the wasteland for Midnight Book Club next week, and we will learn about extended forms of cognition and the organic information network, the internet that existed before the internet, the ancient internet. That's what we're going to get into next time. Thank you for joining me for Midnight Book Club. Again, we're reading the book Encounters. I am so excited to dive deeper in on this. If you were expecting more in-your-face alien encounters, wait for that. That is coming later in this book. We have to start slow. We got to crawl before we could walk and walk before we could run, right? We have to learn about the great mental shift, I guess, that I'm just learning about now with you all. We're reading this together. That needs to come before we could accept that these things are real, which I think is so interesting. And thank you so much, Tag. I appreciate you, brother. Always appreciate the kind words. And thank you for joining me in the hot tub today for this book club. It was amazing. I'm going to get out of the tub here. Thanks everyone for joining for Midnight Book Club. We're going to switch over to some gaming now. I'm going to switch out and get some Cyberpunk going. So join me for that if you'd like. We're going to continue my solo melee run through Cyberpunk for a couple hours and then call it a night. But it's been a pleasure. Natural Werewolf. Love the name too, Natural Werewolf. Very cool name. And look, we're the same level. That's tight. That is sick. Okay, cool. Well, thanks for joining us. Well, Werewolf, I'm taking off. Thanks for joining me today. Thanks for stopping by. Werewolf. This is the Worm signing off.